Welcome to Kids Doc Talk with Dr. Jennie. Our guest today is Dr. Tamika Maxwell, talking about traveling with children. Dr. Maxwell is from Davie, Florida. She completed medical school at the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine and her pediatric residency at Good Samaritan Hospital in West Islip, New York. She is board certified by the American Board of Pediatrics and is a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics, American Osteopathic Association, and the American Medical Association. Dr. Maxwell is currently the lead physician at Pediatric Associates Lauderdale Lakes office. Her interests include traveling and listening to music. Welcome, Dr. Maxwell.
Welcome to Kids Doc Talk with Dr. Jennie. Dr. Jennie is a board-certified pediatrician and is the director of telemedicine at Pediatric Associates.
Hi, Dr. Maxwell. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Sure. So I'm excited to talk about traveling with kids. It's certainly the time to discuss it. And it's a question that comes up very frequently, I think, especially when people think about traveling now in the current climate with COVID, trying to figure out what's safe. So I'm excited to get some guidance for you. So just to start off, what are some challenges, some general challenges of traveling with young kids?
So it can be challenging, but you want to try and make it fun as much as you can. You know, summer's coming up and it's really just a wonderful experience for kids to travel with us. And there's always going to be challenges, COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID. But general challenges, I would say, is one, keeping them entertained, right? If you're on a long trip, whether it's a plane or a bus ride or car ride, keeping them entertained can definitely be a big challenge. And adhering to their schedule. You know, we can't always fly right in between nap time, or sometimes we're doing overnight naps or overnight sleep time, flying over that time, or, you know, maybe when we get to a certain destination, the activities that we're doing don't really lend to the child's schedule. And so that can be a challenge as well. If the child happens to get sick right before you travel, and then, or even get sick while you're traveling, that can always be a challenge as well. But there's ways to get around that, and we can discuss that. One of the things that I recommend is, I kind of like the phrase is, before you go, get in the know, right? So where are you traveling? For how long are you going to be there? What are you going to be doing while you're there? And how old are your children? Because it's really going to be based on their age, is going to really change the guidance. And so if you kind of look at those factors, it kind of helps you to prep and plan ahead of time. And you do want to have some preparation before going into a trip, regardless of how long or short it is. And so for your shorter trips, you know, it's going to be a little bit easier to stick with their schedules, their routines, whereas the longer trips, whether it's the actual travel that's long or you're staying in your destination for a long time, then that kind of changes things. So you want to kind of get into the nitty gritty with that. What's the weather going to be like? What are you going to be doing while you're there? And then adjust accordingly. You know, when we're traveling, I always like to make a little trip to the dollar store, pick up some cool toys, and it's always nice to have a brand new toy when you get on a plane or in a bus ride. Get some activity books, some coloring books, some write and erase, so that it's nothing that can cause any trouble, you know, traveling with a bunch of markers and crayons. You want to just make it light and easy and fun, things that you can put in the child's carry-on, and those things will really help to distract the child, engage the child while you're traveling, and that can help with some of the challenges of whininess or missing a nap time, or, you know, just off the normal schedule.
So it sounds like we really need to expect kids to have a little bit of flexibility, and for parents to have a little bit of flexibility when traveling with young kids, since it'll sort of throw off things on the schedule. So in general, how strict do you recommend parents continue to stick to their child's designated, like, sleeping schedule, napping schedule? Because I find that sometimes parents will try to make travel arrangements like around those times. If, let's say, you know, booking a later flight so the kid can sleep on the flight, is that really necessary? Do you find that that's helpful, or are you sort of the thought that once you're traveling, kind of, you know, throw the schedule out the window and just go with the flow?
Mm-hmm. So first, with travel, expect the unexpected for sure. There will always be something that happens that we don't expect, whether we get delayed in a flight or, as I mentioned earlier, somebody gets sick, or the destination that you're traveling to, something changes, the weather changes. So definitely expect the unexpected. Second, I think you need to evaluate yourself and your child. You know your child best. And so you know whether they're a pretty regimented a child, or whether they do well with change, as well as yourself. Some of us may be more regimented than others. So you have to really do what's going to be best for your well-being and your child's well-being. And usually once they're situated, then we feel our calm in our mama and dada hearts. And so take a look at that. And I wouldn't say necessarily throw the schedule out the window. For the older kids, you can definitely flex a little bit more. But for our babies and toddlers, you do want to stick to a routine. It doesn't have to be strict to the letter, to the exact minute, but you do want to have a guide, because that's going to tell you when they're hungry, when they're tired. If they start acting up, what time is it? Oh, okay, it's snack time, or oh, okay, it's nap time. And it kind of gives you a window into what they're feeling, where those little ones may not be able to express it to you. So it doesn't have to be to the letter. Be a little flexible with it, but do kind of stick to a general routine and a general structure. So when traveling to different time zones, or even international travel, where you may be having long travel on planes or buses, if it's here in the country, jet lag can be an issue, and that can be even hard for us as adults. And so, if you're able to manipulate the times that you're traveling, it's great to do an overnight flight so that the child and you can actually sleep. And then when you arrive, you're actually refreshed and ready to go, if possible. Not always possible, but really important that you get some physical activity once you do reach that destination, especially outside physical activity. That nice bright sunlight is going to help to regulate the brain to your wake cycle and sleep cycle, going to help to get that sleep back on order. And it always helps to exercise and really get some cardiovascular movement, so that it helps to regulate the body of when it's time to eat, when it's time to nap. And it always helps with mood too, right? Because it helps to boost our natural hormones that help us feel happy and regulated. So make sure that you do work in some exercise time, some outside time, maybe some walks as a family, even to explore new areas is always fun when you're traveling, just to help ease that jet lag a bit.
I think another patient population that will be uniquely challenging to travel with is like our neurodiverse kids, right? So kids on the autism spectrum or ADHD. We for sure those kids absolutely love routine and thrive on routine. And any change in their routine, right, can be sometimes catastrophic for them and for the family. So I love all of those tips of keeping at least one watch like on the home time and sort of prepping and trying to accommodate the child sleeping and napping schedule. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about screen time, because I think that's a lot of parents, even for me, like as a parent, that's definitely my go-to for like travel and longer travel. But then as the pediatrician brain, the part of my brain goes, maybe this isn't like a great solution. So what are some, you mentioned a few, but I want to explore this a little more. Like what are some alternatives to screen time for longer travel?
Yeah, I mean, screens work wonders, but to the detriment at times. And so I think it's okay to have as kind of your tool in the box, but not the first thing that you go to. You may have delays in travel, and it's hard to keep them entertained for such long periods of time. But I think starting out with things that are going to engage them. What is your child naturally interested in? Again, you want to pack that little carry-on bag with little games and little gadgets. And often it doesn't take much, little things that light up. And again, dollar store, Walmart is your best friend. They have all sorts of little watches and little drawing pads and sticker books and different activity books that you can engage with the child. I think as much as you engage with them, the more you're going to keep their attention. And it's also a great way for you to spend time with them. You can have conversation as well about what to expect on this trip. What are we going to be doing? What are our activities? Who are we going to be seeing? And that can take up quite a bit of time as well and be a great distraction, but also an important way to bond and spend time and prepare your child for the trip. And so I think finding those ways before we go to the media and use that kind of as your last resort. And then, again, we want to be flexible with travel. Even if you're not big on the media at home, it's okay, because that these are short windows. These are limited times to express to them. This is not going to be every time. This is not the routine, but, we're going to try something a little different. And again, try to do as many media activities that are engaging, if it's something that they can even learn from. And that way you kind of had a double whammy, even though they're actually on the screen time. And then usually things kind of smooth out, and you had that ability to really bond with your child, then it allows for a calmer trip and a more enjoyable trip.
I love that. I love that hack of doing something like educational. You feel a little bit better about maybe some extended screen time. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about COVID and travel during COVID, because I still get a lot of these questions, and I don't necessarily know that I'm giving the right answer, but I think the answer is probably different for every family.
Mm-hmm.
What are your current, like, what are your thoughts, or what's your current recommendation for families who are going to be traveling with kids who may not necessarily be vaccinated against COVID, given the current numbers in the community?
Mm-hmm. So, COVID is still around. It's gotten, to a much more sustainable state. And yes, the numbers aren't what they were a year ago if we were trying to travel last summer or last fall, but still, a threat to our children and to us as adults and to elderly, especially if we're traveling to see grandparents that we may not have been able to see in a long time, or aunts and uncles. And so it's important that we still protect ourselves. So a few things are still going to be most important with COVID, regardless if you're traveling or still at home, is going to be vaccination for all of those that are of age to vaccinate, proper mask wearing, and hand washing, right? So we want to make sure that we stick to those rules regardless, and it's still evident and still applies to right now and to this summer, even though things have improved, and depending on where you live, restrictions may have been relaxed a bit. We are starting to see some upticks in COVID as people travel and people relax in their masks. And so we still do recommend that 2 and over, that we try to mask for as long as possible. We totally understand that with 2 and 3-year-olds, and even some older kids or developmentally challenged kids, that they can't really wear their masks for long periods of time. But you want to set that as your precedent and your goal. And so, you want to try and wear those masks with the children for as long as possible. And then you give them breaks when they need to. But you want to kind of set it as a rule instead of the exception, because it still is the best way to protect ourselves, especially those that are under 5 and not yet vaccinated. For you yourself, you can get boosted up so you can make sure that you protect yourself and others that you may be visiting. And remember, if we're going to visit friends and family, we're going to be staying with friends and family, then we have a lot more close contact with them. And so we want to make sure that we're not only protecting ourselves, but protecting them from us as we are coming off of a plane and being exposed to others. So we don't necessarily have to mask in that home environment, but you do want to protect yourself before and after, so that everybody can enjoy themselves and have a good time on traveling.
So it sounds like you do recommend that kids continue to mask on planes and basically any kind of public transportation, right?
Yes. And even if you're going to do certain activities, Disney World and these things where there's large volumes of people moving in and out, I still think it's important to protect yourself because you want to, again, have an enjoyable trip. And even though kids, generally speaking, do well if they get infected with COVID, maybe not so much mom and dad, maybe not so much auntie, uncle, and grandparents. So we do want to do due diligence and protect those around us. But who wants a sick kid when they're traveling, right?
Sure.
So it's much better to try and mask up and protect yourself as much as possible.
I agree. Pretty simple, pretty for the most part, right? An easy thing that we can do to absolutely protect our kids, even from getting a little bit sick. Let's talk about international travel, because whenever I hear about a family taking a child on an international trip, I'm always like in awe, because I've never been able to do this with my kids. I'm like, it's just so intimidating to me. So what kind of know about international travel of the actual trip itself, as well as anything that we may not know about, right? Requirements of a foreign country, vaccines, things like that.
Yeah, so international travel has its own challenges, some separate challenges from just traveling within the US. And so I think preparation, again, is going to be number one. So you want to plan before you go. And so it's always a good idea to reach out to your pediatrician, good 4 to 6 weeks before you're traveling. Depending on where you're going, again, it's going to be the when, where, and how old your children are, how long you're going to be staying is going to cater, or we'll have to adjust our guidance. But that 4 to 6 weeks allows time if your child needs to catch up with vaccines. We want to make sure that they're up to date with all their routine vaccines. Some countries do require additional vaccines to enter the country. And so you don't want to get into any stickiness trying to rush around and do that prior. So we can always recommend if there's a particular vaccine that's required to get into a country, you may need to visit a travel clinic to get that. You also may need some preventative medication for certain countries, like for illnesses like malaria, and that has to be taken at a certain time frame prior to you traveling while you're there and then once you come back. And so it's important to really get that set before you go. Second piece would be making sure your documents are set, right? We always kind of forget to make sure, is my passport up to date? So I hear that a lot, that we're kind of in a little bit of a pickle there because we don't have up-to-date documents. So you want to make sure that that's up to date. Get a copy of your vaccination to travel with, and you will also want to copy your passports. So you want to leave it with your emergency contact at home and also travel with a copy just in case your passport gets lost or stolen. You always want to make sure that we can get back into the country, right? And then the third piece is thinking about, again, where are you traveling? How long are you staying there? So if you're going to be visiting friends and family, it's a little bit different than if you're staying at a hotel or going on a cruise ship. Guidance is slightly different. When you're at home with another family, you may be exposed to more illnesses that way because you're in more close contact. You're exposed to neighborhoods, maybe animals, food that may not be prepared the same. So we want to remember that when we're traveling to other countries, they have different laws, different restrictions, and different food preparations. So it's always important that you make sure that you kind of go through those things. Never eating food that's not fully cooked. You don't want to do any raw food while you're traveling. You want to be careful and not do any tap water. You want to do more bottled water. Watch out for the ice because that's the tricky part. That's usually through tap water. You can't possibly prepare your own food, but you do want to make sure that it's as safe as possible. Protecting yourself against any animal bites, as animals in other countries may not be vaccinated the same as here. So kind of staying away from animals, having that conversation with your kids prior, that we're not going to just go up and pet. And then health-wise, things like mosquitoes. So you're traveling with your insect repellent, you're traveling with your sunblock, regardless of where you're going, just to help protect you. But again, certain countries may have illnesses that are transmitted through mosquitoes, and you want to protect yourself against that.
Wow. So a lot to consider. So definitely sounds like preparation is key.
Yeah.
For those longer trips. A really common question I get, and I'm sure you do as well, is what can I give my child, right? So like as part of the preparation, I think sometimes parents are like, okay, it's going to be a long flight. Ideally, they will sleep the whole time. What can I give them to accomplish that? What's your answer to that?
Nothing. I wouldn't recommend giving any Benadryl or any other drugs. It sounds like a good plan, but honestly, many medications, including Benadryl, can have side effects, and it can actually make the situation worse. So you can have dry mouth, dry nose, throat, constipation, tummy aches, even some dizziness. And not everybody reacts the same. Some people have what's called a paradoxical effect to the medication. So instead of sleeping nicely and calmly, they're more restless, they're jittery. So we actually don't recommend any medication when traveling. Again, get that magical bag of all sorts of cool snacks and activities. Do your best with the nap time and the bedtime. I always recommend bringing your lovey or your special blankie. A little stuffed toy is always good to make them feel at home, make them feel comfortable. One little trick that I learned as a mom is the little neck pillow that we use for ourselves. It actually works really good if you're breastfeeding. You just put it in the crotch of your arm and it gives you a nice little pillow there and cushion for the baby while you're breastfeeding, or your small toddlers or kids. They can use it as a pillow and it's not something big and bulky, just to give a little comfort there. And so you want to try and bring as many little things as you can to make it feel like the comforts of home, but you want to kind of hold off any kind of medication.
That's usually my answer too. And sometimes I'll get some pushback from parents like, well, I've given Benadryl to them before, so I know that they're going to react well, and I know it makes them sleepy. What's the harm, right? And certainly we know that nothing is without risk. And I'm generally not a fan of giving medication unless it's actually needed. And I don't think this qualifies as a case, right?
That's right.
Okay, we covered a lot of really important pearls that you shared. Anything else, any like really critical things that you want to mention for families who are traveling this summer?
I think just really getting prepared ahead of time is really going to be key, because that's the best way to make sure that we can kind of ward off as many of those unexpected issues that may occur. And so planning ahead, reaching out to your pediatrician, you can always reach out even while traveling. We're available. And, if your child is sick while traveling or gets sick while there's many illnesses that can be prevented or even kind of curtailed if we kind of prep ahead of time. So don't forget that medical kit. You want to make sure you have your Tylenol, your Motrin, your Band-Aids, anti-itch cream, your antibacterial cream, a little hydration powder like the Pedialyte or Gatorade, just in case we have a little tummy upset or not drinking well, a little vomiting illness while traveling. And just expect the unexpected. So you want to try and be as flexible as possible while still kind of sticking to generally your routine and just really paying attention to the cues of your child. They're going to let you know if something's off. And so use your intuition, even especially when traveling. Be very aware, as surroundings, especially internationally, can be very different from ours. And I think if you kind of just stick to those, that you'll have a wonderful trip and continue to do it, again and again. And it's such a wonderful gift to give to your kids that you want to make it as pleasurable of an experience as possible. So just remember, before you go, get in the know.
I love that. And I think that's a really important takeaway, right? Like, yes, it's good to kind of have all this in mind and prepare and like be conscious of the safety aspect, but ultimately it's actually a really important thing to travel with kids. They get a lot out of it. They're exposed to new places, new cultures, new people, new scenery, or new family members. And there's a lot of value to traveling with kids.
For sure.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Make sure you like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Thank you for joining us on Kids Doc Talk.